Since the war in Ukraine, relations between the EU and Russia have largely been on ice. Estonia, in particular, is afraid of a Russian attack and often describes itself as the next victim of Putin's expansion. This is because the country itself has a Russian minority that makes up almost 25% of the total population. And one city in particular is at the center of this: Narva. The city goes by many names. Many refer to it as the outermost corner of Europe, others as the only entirely Russian city within the European Union. This is because over 95% of the population of Estonia's third-largest city is Russian, most of whom continue to cultivate their own language and culture. And since the war, the city has taken on an even more special role. The city is divided. On one side of the river is the aforementioned Estonian town of Narva. On the other side is Ivangorod, which belongs to Russia. Once called the Peace Bridge, the connecting route has since developed into a massive fortified complex, creating one of the most bizarre borders in Europe. Time and again, people on the Estonian side send messages to Russia, but the population in Narva is by no means united. While some enjoy their lives in free Europe, others refuse to integrate into Estonian society and only follow Russian propaganda news. The Estonian government fears that Putin could misuse this population for his own purposes, as he has already done in Ukraine. So it is high time we took a closer look at this city. What is life like in the only Russian city in the EU? How has life changed as a result of the war? And why did the Germans, of all people, have a hand in it? We take a look at all these exciting questions in today's video. Have fun. The story begins in the time of the Crusades. Not only did they take place in the Middle East, but many North German knightly orders also traveled to the Baltic states to Christianize the last pagans on the edge of Europe. The so-called Teutonic Order emerged, which took possession of large areas, including the whole of present-day Estonia. The order began to secure the conquered territories with castles and fortresses at an early stage. The Narva River in particular was one of the most important borders of the empire. The small town of Narva on the western side of the river was massively expanded, and a castle was built at a strategically well-placed point to protect it from invaders. The city thus grew into an important trading point between East and West, which the Russians also wanted to profit from. And so, under Ivan the Great, they also built a city at the same location on the other side of the river, the fortress of Ivangorod. On the other side, the Teutonic Order lost influence and was eventually defeated by the Swedes, but the Germans remained the upper class throughout Estonia until the First World War. At the beginning of the 18th century, however, one of the greatest upheavals occurred. In the Great Northern War, Russia was able to defeat the Swedes and conquer large parts of the Baltic region. Both sides of the Narva were now Russian, and the twin towns of Narva and Ivangorod gradually grew together into one city. But in the 20th century, the city's situation became much more complicated. Following Estonia's independence after the First World War, the entire city was officially transferred from Russia to Estonia. However, this was followed by the conquest of the Germans and reconquest by the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And after Estonia regained its independence in 1991, Russia no longer wanted to give up the city. I'm currently working on another video in which I'll go into more detail about how Russia still occupies Estonian territory today. The initial situation today is that the city is divided. The city of Narva to the west, and the city of Ivangorod to the east. However, due to the long Russian occupation, Russians make up by far the largest part of the population in both cities. Although this is an understatement, as they are virtually the only population group with over 95%. As a result, the Estonian government has faced great difficulties since independence. While it pursued a course of national unity, Many Russians continued to feel connected to the former Soviet Union. This was further encouraged by the economic decline of eastern Estonia following the collapse of the Soviet Union. While the textile industry flourished there for a long time, the socialist system collapsed with the opening up to the West. Estonia developed into a high-tech location and a service society. However, it was mainly the western cities, such as the capital Tallinn, that benefited from this, which is why young people migrated there. The eastern cities near the Russian border often felt attached and refused to integrate further into Estonian society. Over the years, a Russian oasis was created in Narva, in the middle of the European Union. I was recently there myself and was able to visit this extraordinary city. You can see the imposing castles on both sides. On the western side, there are Estonian, EU, and NATO flags flying everywhere, as well as countless Ukrainian flags. On the other side, a huge Russian flag flies over Ivangorod Castle. Particularly striking was the large blood-stained Putin poster on the Estonian side, which is probably also very clearly visible in Ivangorod. The now heavily fortified border bridge, which is now completely closed to traffic, was also very noticeable. Apart from that, the city really felt like a Russian city. You could only hear Russian on the streets. Almost everything was written in Cyrillic, and the city largely conveyed the typical Russian Eastern Bloc flair. Quite different from Tallinn, for example, or the second-largest Estonian city, Tartu. And there are always conflicts in the city, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In 2022, the Estonian government removed the most important monument, a Soviet tank, from the city center, which caused great uproar, especially among the older population. And from August 1, 2024, the government is planning a school reform that will gradually replace the Russian curriculum with the Estonian one. Many teachers are threatened with dismissal, and there is already a great deal of resistance. Overall, however, it seems as if people are very happy to live on this side of the river. They are much better off here. The EU is promoting the development of the city, and most people emphasize that European values are very important to them. Nevertheless, most people naturally remain closely connected to Russia through their relatives, language, and culture. The frequent Kremlin messages do the rest, and so the city remains a truly exceptional corner of Europe, which is not only territorially, but also culturally very separate from the rest of Europe.